Close your eyes and journey back in time with me. The air is still and cool, and the year is 1346. We find ourselves in a humble village on a quiet evening, the sun setting in gentle hues of gold and purple over fields and hills. A farmer finishes his day's work, leading an ox-drawn plow through rich earth. His wife gathers herbs in the fainting light, while children laugh and chase each other between cottages of wattle and daub. In a nearby monastery, a monk lights a tallow candle and murmurs evening prayers. In the market town beyond, merchants haggle, craftsmen close their workshops, and weary travelers find supper at an inn. Life follows its familiar rhythms, seasons of planting and harvest, of feasts and fasts, with every ordinary joy and sorrow. For now, war and hunger are distant worries. The village has known poor harvests and even rumors of battles in far-off lands. Yet tonight there is peace. Neighbors share a loaf of bread, church bells toll softly for vespers, and the world feels stable and secure under the turning wheel of heaven. Little do they know that these twilight moments of normalcy are precious. An unprecedented catastrophe is stirring far away, one that will shatter the fabric of daily life across Europe, bringing suffering on a scale no one has imagined. But on this evening, there is only the chorus of crickets and the warmth of community as we sit by the fire and prepare to witness what history has in store. In a bustling Italian port across the sea, another day draws to a close. It is late autumn in the year 1347. The harbor of Messina in Sicily is crowded with ships, their masts swaying gently. Dock workers unload sacks of grain and bundles of furs from eastern lands. Among these vessels is a fleet of Genoese merchant ships that arrive under strange circumstances. As rumor has it, those ships fled a distant trading post on the Black Sea, a port called Kaffa. Word filters through the docks. Kaffa had been under siege by a Mongol army when a terrible sickness struck the besiegers. It is said the attackers, in a final act of grim warfare, hurled the corpses of their dead over the city walls with catapults, hoping to infect those inside. True or not, something deadly did spread in that far-off place. Now the ships from Kaffa have come to Messina, and they have brought that something with them. At first, it's just a murmur among the sailors. A crewman who fell ill at sea, a traveler burning with fever carried off the ship on a stretcher. Stevedores notice rats scurrying off the galleys and dying strangely on the wharves. Within days, sailors and porters alike are collapsing with a mysterious illness. A dock worker's wife finds him at home with a headache and swollen lumps in his groin. The city's healers are baffled. They have seen fevers before, but not this. Swellings, dark, egg-sized buboes rise painfully in the armpits and legs of the sick. Many bleed from the nose, or cough up blood, or are seized by chills so violent they can scarcely stand. And the speed. A man feels fine at dawn, and by dusk he is dead. It is as if one could breakfast with his family and dine with his ancestors in paradise by nightfall. People whisper, echoing the shocked observation that later will be recorded in Florence. Fear takes hold in Messina. Families try to nurse their loved ones, but soon many fall sick themselves. The air grows thick with dread and the odor of sickness. The authorities, terrified, order the Genoese ships out of the harbor, hoping to expel the pestilence along with them. The ships do sail, some to Marseille, some to Genoa, others to ports beyond, spreading from person to person in ways no one yet understands. By year's end, Sicilians are dying by the hundreds. Panic spreads faster than the contagion. Some residents flee by road or ship, unknowingly carrying the sickness to every corner of the island. As fugitives from Messina stagger into the countryside, some collapse and die on the roadside or in open fields, never reaching refuge. Other towns, hearing of the pestilence, bar their gates against any who come from the stricken city. In Catania, fearful officials refuse to allow the dead from Messina to be buried in their... The pestilence, which some simply call the Great Mortality, or the pestilence of corpses, now marches inexorably west and north. By the turn of 1348, the plague, as we will come to know it, invades the Italian mainland. In early spring, a sense of foreboding hangs over the city of Florence, the most beautiful of cities, normally alive with commerce and art. Reports of a devastating illness elsewhere have reached the city, tales of a deadly pestilence that turn westward with monstrous strength, seemingly unstoppable. The Florentines, like many communities, try to take precautions. The city's magistrates organize crews to clean the streets of refuse, hoping to purify the air, and quarantine the sick, banning the infected or suspected travelers from entering. Processions of priests and friars wend through the streets, beseeching God's mercy with hymns and prayers. Incense and aromatic wood are burned in homes to ward off what some physicians suspect is bad air, yet all these measures prove futile. As the spring of 1348 begins, it arrives. The plague takes root in Florence in a most awe-inspiring manner, as one Florentine writer will later recall. At first, only a few fall ill. A merchant's daughter here, a tanner in the market there. Neighbors whisper anxiously. Soon, however, the illness is everywhere. Within weeks, death permeates daily life. A telltale sign is the swelling, lumps the size of hazelnuts or eggs, that erupt under arms, in groins, behind ears. These boo-boos darken to a ghastly purple black. Almost all afflicted develop high fever, trembling chills, and aches. Some also show mysterious black spots on the skin. Many victims, racked with pain, grow delirious or fall into a stupor. A few slip into sudden coma. In the worst cases, the infection spreads to the lungs and the patient begins coughing bloody sputum. That form is the most contagious of all. Families watch in horror as an entire household can be gone in a matter of days. Scarcely one alone ever died in a house. A chronicle in Ireland will note, commonly husband, wife, children, and servants went one way, the way of death, together. Fear deepens to terror. People observe that being near the sick often precedes one's own sickness. The common folk conclude the plague spreads by poison or miasma carried in the air. Some believe just breathing the same air as a victim, or even looking at them, can doom you. This illness seemed to strike through the breath and sight, writes Agnolo de Turo, a Sienese man who witnessed it firsthand. With such belief, ordinary human bonds begin to break. The very presence of a loved one becomes seen as a mortal threat. Thus the unthinkable happens. People abandon those dearest to them in hopes of saving themselves. One citizen avoided another, writes one observer in Florence. Almost no one cared for his neighbor. Even family ties disintegrate. Orban abandoned brother, wives abandoned their husbands, and mothers and fathers refused to tend their own children as they succumbed. In many homes, the sick lie untended, moaning for water or crying out in delirium, with only indifferent hired servants, when such can even be found, to attend them. House servants lured by exorbitant wages, since caring for plague victims has become the most dangerous job, often drop dead themselves after a few days of service. Death without sorrow becomes commonplace. When someone dies, few dare come near the body, let alone hold a proper vigil or funeral. The usual rituals of grief and burial are upended. Step into a street of Florence at the height of the plague. The lanes are eerily quiet except for the shuffling of a death cart and the plaintive cry of "Bring out your dead." At dawn, the living residents gingerly carry out the corpses of those who perished in the night, leaving them on doorsteps. Many wrap the bodies in shrouds. Others, lacking even that, leave them in whatever bedding they died. A few grieving souls might place flowers or herbs, posies of rue and sage, on the bodies, hoping to mask the stench. But make no mistake, the stench of death hangs heavy. One chronicler remarks that the smell from the mass graves becomes so appalling that people cannot bear to walk past the churchyards. The piles of corpses grow each morning, bodies here, there, and everywhere, until buyers or carts arrive to carry them off. Often, there are not enough coffins or carts, so several bodies are heaped together on a single board. It is common to see on one stretcher the lifeless forms of what had been an entire family, father and son, or mother and child, or three brothers side by side. Two priests trudging to perform a burial might suddenly find 5 or 6 biers falling in line behind them unbidden. The clergy themselves are overwhelmed. Many priests are sick or dead, so funerals are rushed if they occur at all. There are no more processions of mourners, no solemn masses with candles and incense, only the hurried mutter of a burial prayer, if a priest is present, and the scrape of shovel on earth. Nor were there tears or candles or any company to honor the dead. Boccaccio writes of these days, "People had become so numb that they cared no more for the death of others than for the loss of a goat." Soon the city's usual burial grounds overflow. The ancient custom, each family resting in its own tomb or plot, is impossible when hundreds die every day. With grim efficiency, the authorities resort to mass graves. Great pits are excavated in graveyards or open fields. Into these trenches go the endless dead. Workers layer bodies in rows, covering each thinly with dirt or lime before adding the next layer. In such a way, hundreds of souls are consigned together to the earth, until the pits were filled to the brim, and more had to be dug, as Agnolo de Tura describes in Siena. In his city, they died by the hundreds both day and night, and all were thrown into ditches and covered with earth, he recounts. The reality is almost too much for the mind to grasp. Agnolo admits, it is impossible for the human tongue to recount the awful truth. He himself had to perform an act no parent should ever imagine. I buried my 5 children with my own hands. One can only picture this father, trembling with grief and disbelief, lowering one small body after another into the ground, with no one to comfort him and no priest to offer last rites. And so many died that all believed it was the end of the world, he concludes. In such moments, it surely felt like it. The plague does not confine itself to the cities. In the countryside, too, death spreads its wings. Peasants in remote villages initially think they might be spared. A peddler from the city, a wandering friar, a fleeing family seeking shelter. Any could unwittingly carry the contagion into a previously untouched village. Without physicians or surgeons of any kind, the rural folk are utterly defenseless. In village after village, the same tragedies unfold. The field workers fall sick in their cottages, with no one to tend them. Poor laborers die in the very furrows they have been plowing, or in the crude huts by their fields. They die, not like humans, but like animals, one account says, with no more ceremony than a beast would receive. Families here are as frightened as those in cities. Neighbors shy away from each other, desperate to avoid the scourge. When a whole family perishes behind closed doors, it might be days before someone notices, drawn only by the smell of decay. Out in the highways and fields, travelers come upon eerie sights. Wagons overturned and their drivers dead, or shepherdless flocks of sheep grazing next to the lifeless bodies of their shepherds. In the forests, wild animals pick at human corpses that lie unburied where they fell. Everywhere, normal life grinds to a halt. Plows stand idle in half-tilled fields. Oxen still yoked, but with no master to guide them. Grain ripens and withers untended. Fruit drops from the orchards and rots on the ground. Those healthy enough to flee have fled, and those remaining are often too sick or too hopeless to work. Believing the end of days has truly arrived, country folk cease their labors. They slaughter their pigs and cattle for feasts, empty their storehouses and consume what they have, figuring there may be no tomorrow. In some places, once prosperous farms turn into wilderness. Oxen, asses, sheep, goats, pigs, chickens, and dogs, the faithful companions of humans, wander freely among deserted homesteads. Boccaccio writes that many animals, as if they had reason, returned at evening to the familiar houses, even though their owners lay dead inside. We can picture a peasant's dog whining at the door, waiting for a master who will never again open it. The silence in these rural areas is profound. No voices, no village church bells, for even the bell ringers have died. Only the rustle of overgrown crops in the wind and the occasional lowing of an abandoned cow break the stillness. Back in the cities, an eerie atmosphere reigns. With so many dead and others afraid to leave their homes, normal social life vanishes. Streets that once bustled with vendors and laughter markets are empty, shops stay shuttered, bakers, butchers, and other trades struggle as their apprentices die or customers vanish. In some cities, laws and governments simply stop functioning. Courts close down because officials and scribes are dead or absent. Civic projects are abandoned mid-construction. Half-built walls and cathedrals stand silent. Ships rot in harbor, their crews either perished or refusing to sail. It is as if time itself were suspended in mourning. Each day is measured not by the usual ringing of church clocks, but by the mounting tally of the dead. Amid this collapse, people search desperately for explanations and remedies. Why is this happening? Without any scientific concept of bacteria or contagion, medieval people grasp at whatever ideas their worldview offers. Many conclude it must be the wrath of God, punishing a sinful world. Is this the apocalypse foretold in Holy Scripture? It certainly seems biblical in scale. Some theologians preach that humanity's corruption has brought divine anger, and only sincere repentance can avert destruction. The alignment of planets is also blamed. Scholars at the University of Paris will opine that a rare conjunction of Saturn, Jupiter, and Mars in 1345 corrupted the air. Others speak of miasma, a foul mist emanating from earthquakes or decaying matter, poisoning the lungs of anyone who inhales it. There are even wild rumors of poisoned wells, dark whispers that perhaps some malicious group has spread the disease. Tragically, these whispers fix upon the Jews in some regions. Though Pope Clement VI will sternly condemn this notion, saying those who blame the Jews have been seduced by that liar, the devil, it doesn't stop mobs in cities of the German-speaking lands from attacking Jewish communities. In parts of Europe, frightened and furious people lash out at this scapegoat, leading to violence and massacres, an additional horror spawned by fear and ignorance. In quieter ways, too, social trust erodes. Merchants refuse to trade, neighbors eye each other with suspicion, travelers are shunned as potential carriers of death. If divine punishment is suspected, then divine forgiveness must be sought. Thus arises one of the most extraordinary phenomena of the time, the flagellant movement. In the middle of 1348, as the plague ravages the continent, bands of penitents suddenly appear on the roads of Germany and the Low Countries. They are men, and some women, who call themselves the Brethren of the Cross. They march in solemn processions from town to town, barefoot and wearing minimal clothing despite the weather. Their trademark ritual both horrifies and fascinates onlookers: public self-whipping. In each town, the flagellants gather in the square or in front of the church, forming a circle. They strip to the waist, revealing backs already crisscrossed with old wounds. Each holds a scourge, a whip with 3 leather thongs, and at the end of each thong, bits of iron or sharp metal are tied. At a signal, they begin to chant hymns and prayers. Then in unison they swing the whips over their shoulders and lash their own backs, again and again. The metal tips bite into flesh. Blood streams down as they continue their rhythmic penance, begging God to show mercy on a wretched world. An observer in the Netherlands city of Tournai in 1349 describes the flagellants scourging themselves to free the world from the Black Death. People gather to watch with a mix of reverence and alarm. Some believe these penitents are living saints whose sacrifice can atone for everyone's sins. Others suspect they are deranged. In each place, a few townsfolk may even join the procession, hoping to purify their souls and appease God. For 33.5 days, symbolizing the years of Christ's life, the Flagon Company will journey on, performing this ritual 3 times a day. They refuse the comforts of beds or bath. Many don't even shave or cut their hair during this ordeal. Not surprisingly, some die from the extreme asceticism or from infections in their wounds. Initially, Local clergy tolerate or even welcome these groups, seeing their fervor as inspiring to the fearful populace. But as the movement grows, it spins out of church control. Some flagellants begin preaching strange doctrines, claiming divine visions, or condemning the corruption of the church. They also sometimes stir up crowds against Jews or other supposed sinners, inflaming chaos. By late 1349, Pope Clement VI in Avignon issues a bull condemning the flagellants as heretical and forbidding their processions. Secular rulers, too, begin to turn the groups away at city gates. The movement dissipates as swiftly as it arose, but for a time the image of these bloody penitents is one of the most searing symbols of the plague years. Humanity desperate to atone, punishing itself in hopes that God will lift the curse. While some flog themselves or others cast blame, still others seek more earthly cures. Many even medicine is woefully unequipped to handle the plague, but physicians, barber surgeons, and folk healers do their best with what knowledge they have. In cities like Florence, Paris, and London, learned physicians consult ancient texts, Galen, Hippocrates, Avicenna, for clues. Many conclude the plague is an imbalance of bodily humors caused by corrupt air. Thus they recommend airing out houses with fragrant smoke, burning juniper, laurel, pine, or herbs like rosemary and thyme. People carry posies of flowers or herbs pressed to their noses, hoping the sweet smell will shield them from the deadly venom in the air. A practice so widespread it will echo in children's rhymes centuries later. Preventive measures include avoiding excessive bathing, open pores might let in disease, and not eating moist or phlegmatic foods, which could worsen the body's humors. Some doctors suggest bloodletting or applying leeches, attempting to drain the bad blood or reduce the fever. But those who are weak often die faster after such treatments. Other cures border on superstition or the bizarre. One popular remedy in England involves live chickens. A healthy chicken's backside is plucked of feathers and then applied to a victim's swollen bubbo, trapped in place. The theory is that the chicken will draw out the poison. When the chicken shows signs of illness, it is removed, dunked in water, and strapped on again, repeated until either the patient or the poor chicken dies. In other areas, physicians advise taking a snake, chopping it into pieces, and rubbing the snake's flesh on the buboes. Since the snake was a symbol of Satan, the idea is evil draws out evil. Some try pigeon flesh similarly, though it's unclear why pigeons, perhaps simply because they are readily available. The wealthy might resort to fantastical treatments. Apothecaries sell vials of powdered unicorn horn, likely pulverized narwhal tusk, at great cost, as it's touted as an antidote to all poisons. Needless to say, none of these remedies reliably save the dying. A few lucky individuals recover, against all odds, whether through a lancing of a bubo that drains infection, or a robust constitution, or pure chance. But in 1348 it is hard to know if any particular treatment is effective, or if it is simply providence. More often than not, the healers themselves catch the illness. In Montpellier, for instance, it's recorded that only 7 out of 140 Dominican friars, many of whom acted as caregivers, survived. In Perpignan, out of 9 physicians, 8 died. Out of 18 barber surgeons, 16 died. Those grim statistics echo everywhere. The very people attempting to cure the sick are highly exposed and perish in droves, leaving communities even more bereft of help. Consider the plight of a plague doctor making his rounds in a city like Avignon or Milan. Some wear long robes coated in wax or oils, hoping to repel the pest miasma. In later years, such doctors will don the famous bird-like mask with glass eyes and a beak stuffed with aromatic herbs. But in 1348, that costume hasn't been invented yet. Still, a few might improvise a scarf over the nose and mouth and carry a pomander, a ball of perfume. A doctor enters a dim, reeking home where a whole family lies deathly ill. He may try to lance a bubo with a knife to release bad blood, or apply a poultice of onions, butter, and garlic to draw out the poison. He might sprinkle vinegar about as a disinfectant. But he knows in his heart these measures are long shots. He will record the symptoms, perhaps bleed the patient or have them drink a concoction of crushed emeralds, if welling, or a broth of various herbs, if poor. Then he moves on to the next house, often leaving death in his wake, despite all efforts. Each evening this doctor says a prayer that he will not develop the telltale headache or fever himself. Each morning he steels himself to go out again, as his vocation demands, though fewer and fewer of his colleagues remain. We hear of such brave attempts, especially among monastic infirmarians and clergy, who see tending the sick as a sacred duty. Many a priest continues to give last rites and comfort the dying long after most people have fled, and in doing so, many priests pay with their lives. It's observed that the mortality among clergy is shockingly high, often because they insist on ministering to the afflicted. One chronicler notes that, in the city of Avignon, the papal seat, perhaps half the population succumbed, and among the clergy, the toll was even worse. Clement VI, the Pope, watched 1/3 of his cardinals die around him. He worked tirelessly to keep the church functioning, and so many died without confession or last rites. Clement granted a general remission of sins to all plague victims, trusting in God's mercy in these extraordinary times. He also took the innovative step of consecrating the entire Rhone River as holy ground. Because there was no room left in cemeteries, corpses were being cast into the river en masse, and he wanted their resting place to be blessed. This is an image to ponder. The wide Rhone River, swollen with spring rains, carrying the bodies of the dead downstream, gently bobbing in their funerary shrouds, as a benevolent pope declares the very water to be a floating graveyard made sacred. Avignon in 1348 is a vision of hell. The plague struck there with full force. Each day, as chroniclers later note, the death count soared. At one point, 400 people a day, then 500, then 600 a day are said to have died in Avignon. Imagine the mass funerals, carts unloading bodies at pits outside the city walls, priests standing by in exhaustion, murmurously blessing load after load of coffins until they themselves collapse. And yet, even in Avignon, there are small glimmers of humanity. Pope Clement, for all the corruption later attributed to the Avignon papacy, does something compassionate and wise. He opens the papal palace as a shelter for refugees, and he personally provides funding for food and care of the sick. He even issues edicts to protect Jews from persecution, reminding people that the plague is a result of God's unknowable will, and not the fault of any one group. Those edicts likely saved lives in Avignon, making it a haven for some who fled violence elsewhere. From Italy and France, the plague relentlessly fans out in all directions. By mid-1348, it crosses the Alps into Switzerland and the Germanic lands, and it leaps the Channel into England. There, in the late summer, the people of southern English ports like Melcombe and Dorset witness the arrival of the pestilence, perhaps carried by a ship from Gascony, or carried overland from Normandy. An English chronicler would later write that the cruel pestilence penetrated England by way of the south coast ports in August of 1348. In a village near the coast, we meet a plowman named Thomas and his wife Joan. They have heard vague news from foreign lands of a great mortality, but England has been mercifully untouched until now. One warm day, Thomas notices that the traveling peddler who usually brings ribbons and pins from town has not come for weeks. And he finally arrives. The man looks gaunt and frightened. He mumbles of a terrible sickness in the port town, people dying in heaps, no one to bury them. But Thomas can scarcely believe it. It sounds like a tale to scare children. Joan clutches her shawl tighter as she listens. Soon, however, undeniable signs appear. A priest from a nearby priory, who had journeyed to minister in the stricken town, passes through asking for shelter. That night he develops a fever. By morning, he is dead in the very church where he served Mass the evening before, a rosy bubo upon his throat. The villagers recoil in fear. Over the next fortnight, the invisible scourge spreads among them. One by one, cottages fall silent as entire families are taken. Joan, the ploughman's wife, is among the first to sicken. She buries her face in the crook of her arm, sweating and coughing, while Thomas desperately tries every remedy he knows. A tisane of herbal tea, cool cloths on her brow, prayers whispered fervently over her. But within 3 days she slips away, her face a waxen pallor, leaving Thomas staring in shock at the still form of his beloved. There is no time to mourn. Thomas himself awakens the next day with swollen lymph nodes and a stabbing headache. In his fever, he stumbles out of his hut, disoriented, and sees through hazy vision a group of men digging a pit in the village green. It is to be a common grave, for the local cemetery is already filled. Before the sun sets, Thomas's sons carry his body, wrapped in a shroud Joan had woven, to that communal pit to join their mother. By the month's end, the village is virtually empty. A few children, somehow untouched by the plague, wander the lanes crying for parents who will never answer. Fields of wheat stand unharvested, and cows low at the barn gates waiting for a milking hand that has vanished. Meanwhile, the plague sweeps across England with dreadful speed through late 1348 and 1349. It strikes the port of Bristol, a bustling city of merchants, with particular fury. One later chronicler claims Bristol was so depopulated that scarcely 10 persons remained alive in the town, an exaggeration born of trauma, but indicative of the shock. From the west and south coasts, the pestilence marches inland. By November 1348, it reaches the city of London. There, in the cramped and teeming lanes, the plague finds a perfect breeding ground. London in 1348 is home to perhaps 50,000 or more souls, from wealthy nobles in mansions to destitute beggars living on the streets. Within weeks, the city is transformed into a vast charnel house. The chronicler, Geoffrey Le Baker, later writes that the plague raged in London in such a manner that scarcely 1 in 10 of both sexes survived. Whether it was truly that high or not, the impact is devastating. King Edward III, who resides in Westminster just outside the city walls, is forced to suspend sessions of his royal court. The law courts are closed, as lawyers and judges die or flee. The parliament that was due to gather is postponed. The king writes in anguish to the Bishop of London that the city is so overcome with dead bodies that it is impossible to find enough clerks, or grave diggers, or places to bury them. He authorizes new emergency burial grounds outside the city, including one at East Smithfield, to which countless corpses are conveyed day after day. Many of the dead are buried in layers, with one chronicler noting that the bodies were arranged 100 at a time in long trenches. The sights and sounds of London defy description, church bells tolling incessantly until there are not enough monks alive to ring them, the wails of widows and orphans echoing down alleyways, smoke from funeral pyres, where permitted, darkening the sky. The Thames River flows on as ever, indifferent even as funeral barges carry corpses to mass graves on its south bank. Through all of this, a remarkable number of clergy in London and elsewhere keep tending their flocks. They anoint the dying, say the last prayers at burials, and comfort the bereaved, until they too succumb. The result is that the church in England experiences a crisis. So many parish priests, friars, and nuns die that the church struggles to replace them. In one London parish, it's recorded that all 13 clergy who served the church died in the plague, one after another, each appointed successor living only days. Across Europe, monastic communities suffer terribly. Cloistered together in close quarters, monks and nuns are particularly vulnerable once the illness breaches their walls. For example, in the Franciscan convent of Drogheda in Ireland, 25 friars died by Christmas of 1348, and 23 in the Dublin convent. An English chronicler in Durham, looking back, noted wryly that it seemed, among the friars, only the fat ones survived. A grim jest hinting that perhaps those better fed had slightly stronger resistance. But overall, pious communities see some of the highest mortality. After the plague passes, this will have lasting consequences. New recruits to the clergy are rushed into ordination, often without the rigorous training their predecessors had. A monk in Leicester Henry Knighton later laments that the men who replaced the dead priests were often barely literate and performed the rites improperly. He describes how many chaplains, not adequately educated, took up posts, and how even universities closed for a time, interrupting the education of future clerics. The quality of village priests declines, contributing to a subtle shift in people's respect for the church's authority in the years to come. But in 1349, such future concerns are beyond people's minds. They are living hour to hour, doing whatever they can to survive physically and spiritually in this collapsing world. Let us pause and witness one intimate scene amid the cataclysm. In a small English manor house, a noblewoman sits by the bed of her last remaining child, a boy of 5 who burns with fever. This lady had sent her family away from London when rumors of plague began, retreating to their country estate, locking out all visitors. For a while, they felt safe, isolated in luxury as peasants died in nearby villages. But one by one, despite precautions, her loved ones fell ill. Perhaps it was a contaminated bundle of linens from the city, or a servant sneaking out to visit his family and bringing back the curse. No one can be sure. Her husband, the lord of the manor, was the first to go, cursing in delirium that all his wealth and knights could not save him. Her 2 daughters followed, dying in their mother's arms as she recited psalms through tears. Now only the little boy remains, whimpering softly for a comfort the lady cannot give. The manor's halls, once filled with music and servants' bustle, are hushed. Tapestries depicting hunts and banquets look down on a house of death. The lady has dismissed most of the frightened staff. Only a loyal maid and the old cook remain. She dare not leave this last bedside. She dips a cloth in cool water and lays it on her son's brow, singing a lullaby she used when he was a healthy toddler. In her exhaustion, she sees flickers of movement in the corner. Maybe it's only shadows, or perhaps she imagines the angel of death itself lurking. She prays silently. Lord, if it be thy will, spare this child. Take me instead. But the child's labored breathing slows, then halts. A final exhale, and he is gone. The noblewoman's song falters. Outside in the manor's small chapel, the single remaining maid begins to toll the bell, a lonely echoing sound across the estate. The lady, numb with grief, closes her boy's eyes. In that moment, she realizes she is utterly alone. Through her tears, perhaps she even feels anger. At God? At fate? Why has she been spared when all her family is taken? She is not alone in asking such questions. Across Europe, survivors grapple with guilt and confusion. A Florentine named Francesco Petrarch, a poet and scholar, survives the plague but loses many friends. In a letter he writes soon after, Petrarch pours out his soul. Where are our dear friends now? Where are the beloved faces, the affectionate words, the relaxed and enjoyable conversations? We were a numerous band of friends. Now we are, perhaps, but a tiny remnant. He speaks of feeling that the world itself is ending, that it hardly seems worth making new friends when the human race is almost wiped out. Such lamentations are heartfelt. Those who live through the Black Death often carry deep emotional scars. Some report that afterward they seldom weep, having seen so much tragedy. Their tears are dried up. Others are haunted by nightmares of the dying and the dead. A kind of grim fatalism takes root. Having faced the worst, many survivors fear nothing anymore, which can manifest as either saintly courage or reckless abandon. Indeed, people react in various and sometimes opposite ways to the trauma. There are those who become more devout, seeing their survival as a sign of God's grace. They give thanks, donate to churches, commission altarpieces or stained glass windows depicting their patron saints, who they believe protected them. But there are others who lose faith, after all. Throughout the plague, the prayers and processions did not stop the dying. Many good, pious people died just as swiftly as sinners. This leads some to question, did God abandon us, or was the church powerless to help? A seed of disillusionment is planted. As one chronicle notes, The failure of prayer to avert catastrophe made faith waver for some. In the taverns of a recovering Europe, one might hear more cynicism and dark humor, where before there was reverence. Death became the great equalizer in people's minds, a theme soon seen in art as the danse macabre, the dance of death, where pope, king, and peasant all dance with grinning skeletons. This motif and many other memento mori reflect the collective psyche after the Black Death. Yet, paradoxically, life in the aftermath also offers opportunities for the survivors. The plague, in a macabre way, reshaped the social and economic order. With so many dead, a labor shortage sweeps the land. In cities, entire guilds of skilled tradespeople have lost members. A town might find that only one miller remains alive who knows how to repair the watermill's wheel, or that the only master stonemason died before finishing a cathedral wall. Such specialists are now in high demand. Towns begin to compete, offering high wages to attract craftsmen from elsewhere. For the working class, this is unprecedented. Where before a journeyman or laborer had little bargaining power, now they can command better pay because masters and lords need them desperately. We hear of laws being passed like England's Ordinance of Labourers in 1349, attempting to freeze wages at pre-plague levels because laborers are charging too much. But these laws are hard to enforce. Serfs realize they might leave their lord and find another who will offer freedom and land in exchange for work. One contemporary observes that serfs were no longer bound to one master, for if one lord would not offer better terms, another would instantly hire them. Indeed, peasants became slightly more empowered, as one account puts it, and if the nobles tried to resist this change, the peasants did not shy from protest. The seeds of future peasant revolts are planted in this period. Within a decade or two, uprisings like the Jacquerie in France, 1358, and later the English Peasants' Revolt, 1381, and other rebellions will erupt, fueled in part by post-plague economic tensions. But in the immediate years after 1351, things are a bit more fluid. A peasant who survived might find his workload doubled to cover for dead neighbors, but also find that he can demand a reduction in feudal dues or even leave to seek a better life. In towns, guilds have to accept new members more readily to rebuild their numbers. Some survivors, through inheritance, suddenly own the shops or property of deceased relatives and rise in status. A young blacksmith, once an apprentice, might now run his late master's forge and become a master in his own right, far earlier than expected. A widow who lost her husband might take over his trade permit, since there's no one else, and become an independent merchant, something uncommon before. Old strict hierarchies are cracking, just slightly, enough for a few enterprising folks to climb up. The nobility, meanwhile, suffer their own crises. Many aristocratic families lost heirs. Lineages ended abruptly. Vast estates went to distant cousins or fell into disarray if stewards died. Some manors found themselves without lords at all when an entire family perished. And those nobles who survived found their luxuries harder to come by. Fine cloth, spices, and other goods became scarce or very expensive because trade networks had been disrupted, and craftsmen died. In fact, the immediate economic aftermath is complicated. While wages rose, the prices of goods in some areas skyrocketed due to scarcity, whereas in other areas, an oversupply of goods, from all those who died and left behind belongings behind, caused prices to drop. Land values shift as well. In some regions, fertile land lies foul, and anyone willing to till it can claim it cheaply. In others, survivors consolidate holdings. In general, for the lower classes who survive, living standards can improve. Fewer mouths to feed means less competition for food and resources, and wages tend to outpace prices. Chroniclers note that after the plague, common folk dressed in nicer clothes and ate better bread and meat than they used to, as they could afford to. But these changes don't happen overnight. In the immediate wake of the plague, around 1st Re 501351, Society is mainly focused on recovery and mourning. All across Europe, communities hold what we might call healing rituals. Churches that are still standing and have clergy hold special masses of thanksgiving for the end of the pestilence, as well as masses for the souls of the countless dead. Surviving villagers gather in half-empty churches, each person painfully aware of the empty seats where neighbors or family used to sit. They light candles, sometimes one for each person lost, filling the chapels with the soft glow of hundreds of flames. In towns, perhaps the guilds sponsor memorial processions. The Carpenters' Guild might march with a banner showing their patron saint, in honor of their departed fellows, followed by the Bakers' Guild, and so on. These processions are somber, but they also reaffirm solidarity. We are still here. We endure. There is also rejoicing at having survived. In some places, chronicles mention that once the worst was over, people indulged in feasting as a kind of release. Those who had been lucky enough to live felt a fierce desire to celebrate life. Weddings which had been postponed during the horror now happen in abundance. There are numerous young widows and widowers, and many remarry quickly, practical as well as emotional reasons, joining households to pool resources, taking care of orphan children. So many marriages happened that, one cleric quipped, there were more marriages in a month than he'd seen in years, albeit sometimes marriages without affection, during the height of plague out of desperate need for companionship. By after plague, one hopes affection returned, as genuine bonds formed among survivors. Children who endured the plague, or were born just after, grow up in a very different environment from before. They have fewer playmates, perhaps, but might enjoy better nutrition, because their family's plot of land has fewer mouths to feed. They also carry in their minds the stories of what happened. Imagine a child of 10 who saw their whole family die and then survived. Perhaps they were taken in by an uncle or by a monastery. A child would always remember 1st Re, 4, 8, 1, 3, 4, 9 as a year of darkness. If they became a grandmother or grandfather decades later, they would recount to their grandchildren the tale of the Great Plague in hushed tones, describing how bodies filled the streets and the angel of death passed over our house. We can be sure such stories were told, shaping cultural memory. One eyewitness, the monk John Glynn in Kilkenny, Ireland, wrote in his journal the haunting line, "The pestilence deprived of human inhabitants, villages and cities. I, seeing these many evils, and that the whole world was as it placed within the grasp of the devil, have committed to writing what I have truly heard and examined. And, lest things worthy of remembrance should perish with time, I leave parchment for continuing the work. If, perhaps, any man survive and any of the race of Adam should be left to continue the work I have begun." He then set down his quill, leaving the rest of the pages blank. Those blank pages, in case anyone should still be alive in the future, are among the most poignant relics of the Black Death. They testify to the depth of despair felt in that moment, a genuine question of whether humanity itself would survive. Ultimately, someone did survive to turn those pages. The world did not end. By 1351, the first great wave of the Black Death had largely burned itself out in much of Europe. In some regions, the plague took a bit longer to run its course. Pockets of Eastern Europe and Russia suffered into 1352-53, but the initial explosive pandemic faded. There were simply not enough susceptible victims left alive in one place for the disease to sustain its voracious spread. The great pestilence had killed tens of millions. Modern estimates say perhaps around 1/3 of Europe's people died in those few years, though some contemporaries in their shock claimed it was even more. That only 1 in 10 survived in some towns. In truth, some areas were hit harder than others. A few isolated spots miraculously escaped almost unscathed, maybe a mountain valley or a distant island where the plague never reached. But they were rare. No matter where you traveled in 1351, you would find abandoned homes, fields reclaimed by weeds, and fresh graves in every cemetery. Picture, now, a quiet morning in spring of 1352. In a Tuscan village, survivors gather in the rebuilt little church for Easter. The air is still cool, but sunlight streams through the high window, illuminating dust motes that dance above the altar. The priest, a young man newly appointed to replace the one who died, leads a prayer for the departed. Each villager holds in their heart a litany of names: a mother, a father, a sister, a son, a dear friend, a neighbor. Is scarcely a person who did not lose someone. Many lost entire family lines. Tears flow silently as they remember. But there is also a gentle warmth in that church. They hold each other up. A widow clasps the hand of a surviving neighbor's child, whom she now cares for. Two men who used to be rivals share a pew, having been bonded by the shared work of burying the dead. Kyrie eleison, Lord have mercy, they chant softly, and perhaps they feel that mercy has come at last, for they are still here. After the Mass, they walk out into the sunlight. Birds are singing. Birds that had gone quiet during the height of death now seem to have returned. Wildflowers bloom in the meadows where last year no one was tending the soil, as if nature is offering a balm of beauty for the horror that was. Under an ancient oak, some villagers decide to hold a simple feast. There is fresh bread. Baker's surviving apprentice has become adept, and there is wine from last year's grapes. Few were around to pick them, but enough was gathered. They roast a lamb and break their fast together. They even smile and laugh a bit, swapping memories not just of the plague, but of the loved ones lost, telling funny or kind stories about them, so that their spirits live on in memory. The children, those who remain, play tag among grass stones that are still too new to have grass. Life and death intermingle matter-of-factly now. Elsewhere, in a larger town, say Paris or Florence, a similar cautious revival happens. Merchants reopen stalls. The university in Paris, which suspended lectures, reconvenes and professors and students gather, though many seats are empty. In fact, at the University of Paris, the faculty had written a detailed report in October 1348, trying to explain the plague's causes and advising preventive measures. Now those same scholars debate new theories, humbled by how their astrological explanations did little to stop the devastation. A sense of humility before the unknown pervades scholarly circles, but also a determination to learn and prepare should it ever return. Ah, for return it will. Though none in 1352 know it, the plague is not one single visitation. It will come back in waves, and some places in the 1360s, then periodically for centuries, though never again quite as universally deadly as the first wave. The people of the late 14th century, however, can only hope it is gone for good. Many of them choose to believe that this was a one-time divine chastisement or natural disaster that is now ended. Perhaps relics and prayers have finally won God's favor again. In some regions, they erect monuments. A beautiful cross in the town square, inscribed with the year of the great mortality, or a new altar dedicated to Saint Roche, who in later tradition becomes the patron saint of plague victims. If you travel through Germany, you may find little chapels on hilltops, built as thanks for a village spared or as memorial for one destroyed. Over in Venice, the government, having survived the trial, begins to implement permanent public health boards and a novel idea called quarantine, 40 days isolation for ships based on what they learn, trying to stave off future contagion. Humans do adapt. For now, though, our story returns to the individual level, to the ordinary people who have endured the Black Death and must pick up the pieces. There is a former gravedigger in London who spent 2 years digging trenches and burying thousands. He managed to avoid illness, perhaps due to some lucky natural immunity or sheer fortune. Now, as the death rate has fallen, he finds himself out of work. Hardly sad to lose that grisly employment, but unsure what to do next. He was once a simple cooper, barrel maker. Many of his old cooper-skilled fellows died. Perhaps he can resume that trade and be more needed than ever, as wine merchants need barrels for renewed trade. He washes the grave dirt from his hands and decides to give it a try, using tools left behind by a deceased friend. There is a midwife in a French village who saw almost all the babies she delivered over decades die in the pestilence, along with their mothers. She nearly lost hope and considered throwing herself into the river in despair. But one day, a young pregnant woman came to her, one of the few of childbearing age left, begging her to help bring her child safely into the world. The midwife steeled herself. Life must go on. She delivered that baby, then another. Now, a couple of years later, she has delivered several healthy plague generation babies and becomes popular, referencing the poses carried to ward off disease and the rosy rash of the illness. Though its exact origin is debated, it reflects the era's imagery. The children skip to its innocent tune, unaware of the dark meaning beneath. The midwife smiles sadly, watching them play, but also feels hope. These children will have a future. And one of the monks, nuns, and priests who survived, many see their ranks replenished by a new wave of vocations. Some survivors, shaken by what they lived through, renounce worldly life and join a monastery out of gratitude or penance. But the monastic communities will never quite be the same. They carry emptiness in their dining halls where brothers once copying books. Still, one can imagine a monk in, say, the Abbey of St. Albans in England in 1350. Every day he goes to the scriptorium and writes a chronicle entry about recent events, trying to make sense of God's plan. He writes of how this tribulation befell the world, perhaps comparing it to the flood. Chroniclers often did note that it felt more final than Noah's flood, since after the flood at least some were spared to continue humanity. He might copy a line from Padu's record, stating just that. He writes of the heroism of some and the cowardice of others, of the flagellants, of the royal decrees, and of how there was death without sorrow, flight without escape during those years. And as he writes, perhaps he prays that such a scourge never returns. The pages of these chronicles are filled with sorrow and admonition, but also with the relief that came when the dying stopped. Slowly, culture and art awakened from mourning. In Italy, Boccaccio, having seen the worst in Florence, completes his masterpiece, the Decameron, by 1353. Its framework, 10 young people telling each other stories while hiding from the plague in a countryside villa, is itself a snapshot of one way people coped. They fled if they could, seeking fresh air and isolation. And they coped by storytelling, humor, and camaraderie, as Boccaccio's characters do. In real life, some groups of friends likely did very similarly, finding refuge away from stricken cities and trying to keep their spirits up by diverting entertainment. Boccaccio's introduction, which we've drawn from earlier, is a testament to the horrors he witnessed. The stories that follow, many bawdy, witty, or wise, are a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. People want to laugh again, to love again, to continue the grand pageant of life. And they do. By the end of the 1350s, Europe has, in fits and starts, resumed much of its former life, but changed in profound ways by the Black Death. Governments have to adjust to smaller populations and shifts in power dynamics. Economies find a new equilibrium, generally with higher wages for laborers and perhaps a burgeoning middle class in some towns as those who survived a cumulative property of those who did not. Serfdom as an institution is fatally weakened in Western Europe, though in Eastern Europe it curiously strengthens as lords try to clamp down. History is complex. The Church, having lost many learned clergy, sees a rise in folk religion and lay practices to fill the void, and a bit of tarnish on its once unquestioned authority. Seeds of the Renaissance are sometimes said to have been planted in this upheaval, as people question old certainties and seek new answers. A spirit of inquiry and innovation is kindled. Above all, the people carry forward a deep awareness of mortality. They have stared death in the face and survived. This imbues a certain carpe diem, seize the day mentality. As one proverb floating around after the plague put it, "Eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow you may die." Some survivors indeed adopt a more hedonistic lifestyle, enjoying what life offers because they know how fragile it is. Others dedicate themselves to service, determined to help the poor and sick, because they know the suffering firsthand. The range of human response is vast, but none remain unchanged by what they live through. Now, our 2-hour tale draws toward its close by the gentle firelight of reflection. We have walked alongside peasants, digging in the fields and then digging graves. We have seen through the eyes of a devoted monk chronicling doom, and a terrified child clutching her mother's hand in a plague-ridden town. We marched with the flagellants beneath blood-red sunsets, seeking forgiveness, and we stood in the courts of kings, suddenly rendered helpless. We smelled the smoke of funeral pyres, and the sweet incense meant to cover the rot. We felt the heartbreak of a father burying his children. We also witnessed the dawn after the darkness, the way survivors crawled from the wreckage, blinking at the sunlight, and slowly, painfully, began anew. In that meditative spirit, imagine one more scene. A grandmother in the year 1370, sitting by the hearth with a grandchild on her knee. She is one of the rare who was an adult during the Black Death and lived to old age. The child asks her, "Granny, is it true what they say, that you once saw death cover the whole world?" The old woman's eyes are distant. She sees in memory the stacked corpses on the church steps, the lonely orphaned girl she took in, who grew up to be this child's mother. She hears the echo of that silence in 1349, when not a cartwheel turned in the street. She nods slowly and answers, "Yes, my love. I saw it. It was a time of great sorrow. People suffered more than I can tell." The child looks at the fire, imagining ghosts and devils perhaps. But then Granny pats his hand and says, "But we survived, you see, and we learned how precious life is." She might show him a locket with a saint's image she wore through those dark days, or a small embroidered handkerchief that was his grandfather's, one of the few keepsakes of all the family she lost. Perhaps she smiles and adds, "Each day we have is a gift. Remember that." And maybe she hums a gentle tune, the same lullaby she used to calm frightened children in those plague years, now just a soothing melody for peace. Our journey across the stricken 14th century draws to an end. We have experienced the daily life of ordinary people caught in an extraordinary cataclysm. From the gentle normalcy of life before to the shocking arrival of an unseen enemy. From the breakdown of all that was familiar, faith, family, community, under the weight of mass mortality, to the halting, courageous steps toward recovery. The Black Death left an indelible mark on every person and place it touched. For years, even decades afterward, people would reference events as before the plague or after the plague, as if time itself were cleft in two by this calamity. Yet, through all this, the fundamental threads of human life proved unbreakable. People continued to care, if not for the dying in the worst moments, then for the living afterward. New bonds were formed to replace those severed. Fields were plowed again. The wheel of commerce creaked back into motion. Children laughed once more in the streets, even if fewer than before. The resilience of ordinary men and women stands as perhaps the most remarkable aspect of this dark tale. In the broader sweep of history, the world that emerged in the late 1350s was not the same as the world of 1340. It was less populous, yes, and for a time more somber. But those who remained carried forward lessons written in blood. They had faced something unspeakable and somehow found the strength to continue. Society structures eventually rebounded. Farms yielded harvests. Cities repopulated, helped by migration from the countryside, and even culture blossomed anew. In some cities like Venice or Milan, where decisive quarantine measures or luck spared many, they proudly resumed normal life quickly. In others, like Florence or Norwich, where entire neighborhoods had been emptied, rebuilding took much longer. Some villages were never repopulated at all. Their ruins slowly crumbled, known thereafter as plague villages, lost to time, with only wildflowers and memories marking where life once thrived. Yet, if you walk through Europe decades later, you would find vibrant signs of recovery. By 1400, a traveler might not immediately guess the scale of death that had swept through. except for the noticeably larger cemeteries and the murals of dancing skeletons on church walls, reminding all who saw them of 1348. A Spanish traveler in the 1367 commented that the land was full of widows and orphan children, a poignant observation of the demographic imbalance, and also that those children seemed healthy and well-fed. Life had in many places improved materially for the lower classes. We end our tale where we began, by the fire's glow, reflecting calmly. The story of the Black Death is somber and heavy, but within it glitters the light of human empathy and perseverance. Think of the countless unsung heroes, the friars and nuns who nursed strangers, knowing it would likely kill them. The neighbors who, despite fear, brought food to quarantined households. The mothers who, even as they were dying, comforted their children with a final lullaby so that the little ones would not feel afraid. Not all abandoned their loved ones. Many embraced them all the more fiercely, choosing love over self-preservation. Those acts of selflessness shine in the dark narrative, and there were those moments of grace, a patient who unexpectedly recovered, a reunion of a surviving father and son who thought each other dead, a village that was mysteriously spared while all around perished, giving the survivors a lifelong sense of special grace. As you open your eyes from this journey into the past, carry with you these echoes: the soft chanting of monks in a church filled with candlelight and grief, the distant rumble of a death cart on cobblestones, the laughter of children chasing pigs through an untended field, the keen of a widow at a mass grave, the flap of the flagellant's banners in a dusty road, and the silence of a world paused, then the stirrings as it awakens again. This has been the story of ordinary people in an extraordinary time. Peasants, monks, merchants, nobles, healers, children, gravediggers. Their voices reach out to us across 7 centuries, not in despair alone, but in wisdom. They remind us to cherish normalcy, for it can be upended in an instant. They remind us of our capacity for both fear and courage, cruelty and compassion. And above all, they remind us that even in the darkest night of history, dawn will come. The human story continues, altered, scarred, but not ended. So ends our long tale beside the fire. Let us extinguish our candle now, its flame having illuminated this tragic yet hopeful saga. As the last smoke of the candle mingles with the night air, we take a moment of silence for those millions of souls lost in that terrible pandemic long ago. May their suffering be remembered, and may the resilience of the survivors guide us in our own times of trial. Farewell, gentle listener, and travel safely back to the present day, carrying the lessons of the past in your heart. In the quiet that follows, perhaps we hear, just briefly, the distant echo of that medieval world. A church bell tolling one last time for the dead, and then the sweet song of a nightingale, announcing that morning will come.